In a world where terrorism has left a bloody mark, there is a handful of organizations whose notoriety places them among the most cruel and brutal in modern history. Whether driven by religious, political motivations or a revolutionary spirit, the violence of these groups is felt around the globe. Just hearing their names will instill terror in you. We will explore the cruelty of Al-Qaeda, forged by the sinister mind of Osama bin Laden, the bloodthirsty advance of ISIS, which destroys everything in its path, the deadly insurgent guerrillas of Colombia led by the FARC, and the worst atrocities committed by the Taliban regime, especially against women. Get ready, because in this new video from Military Force, we will delve into a real jungle where life is worth little and death is the main protagonist.
Mata a uno y espantarás a 10,000. Así dictaba la ideología militar china en el siglo VI a.C. Nos hemos acostumbrado a escuchar esta palabra. Lamentablemente se ha convertido casi en una cotidianidad que no acabamos de entender. Es noticia prácticamente todos los días: el terrorismo.
Our wild journey begins with the organization that completely changed the way the terrorist phenomenon is understood on a global scale. Its very existence led countries around the world to work together to combat it. We are talking about Al-Qaeda. The group was founded in 1988, emerging from the resistance to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan at the end of that decade. Its creator was the famous and feared Osama bin Laden, who used the occupation to recruit and train Islamic fighters. It soon became a global network for uniting the Mujahideen and gained international notoriety in 1998 with two terrible simultaneous attacks. The targets were the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The result, over 200 dead and thousands injured. Undoubtedly, that was the organization's introduction, which quickly became a symbol of violence. But it would not be its most ruthless act. The ideology of Al-Qaeda is based on an extremist interpretation of Islam, aiming to establish a global caliphate governed by Sharia law. Its objectives include the withdrawal of foreign forces from Muslim countries, expelling Western influence, fighting against Israel, and overthrowing governments deemed apostate. For this reason, its greatest enemy has always been the United States, which represents everything this group seeks to combat. It is no surprise that it was the target of the most infamous moment of the organization led by bin Laden. This occurred on September 1, when 19 insurgents affiliated with Al-Qaeda hijacked several planes and crashed them into American targets. 4 commercial flights were hijacked mid-flight and ultimately used to attack the and the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people. The impact of that attack marked a turning point. The words of then U.S. President George W. Bush hinted at a war.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared.
The attack on American soil was met with military operations led by Washington in Afghanistan and Iraq. It marked the beginning of an era of bloody battles against Al-Qaeda and all associated organizations. For many years, the top priority was to find the greatest enemy of Uncle Sam, Osama bin Laden, who was finally located and killed on May 2, 2011. Since then, the group he founded has changed leadership several times and has been losing territory. Although it remains a persistent threat with active cells and affiliates in various countries, it is no longer the most feared terrorist organization in the world. Now, if we consider who took the vacant throne, there is little doubt. The answer has a clear winner: the Islamic State, more commonly known as ISIS. In the turbulent landscape of the Middle East, this powerful actor emerged in the early 2010s amidst the chaos and violence of the civil war in Iraq and Syria. Essentially, it owes its origins to bin Laden's group, as it started as a radical branch of Al-Qaeda. It quickly strengthened, recruiting fighters and exploiting the discontent of the population, who had to endure harsh living conditions due to the conflict, and decided to rebel against the authorities. In 2014, ISIS declared the establishment of an Islamic caliphate, with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as its self-proclaimed leader. In doing so, it established a brutal regime that imposed a distorted interpretation of the Quran. Their extremist perspective justified their violent actions as a religious duty, contributing to unprecedented brutality. The Islamic State has committed countless atrocities, from public executions and beheadings to the kidnapping of civilians and sexual slavery. Additionally, they have destroyed historical and cultural sites, such as the UNESCO Heritage Site in Palmyra, in a clear attempt to erase the history and identity of the regions under their control. However, brutality is not the only characteristic that stands out among the ranks of ISIS. This organization exerts control through its bloodthirsty actions, but also thanks to a cleverly designed propaganda apparatus. By leveraging social media and modern technology, the terrorist group has managed to recruit enthusiastic followers worldwide. They aim to radicalize the youth by promoting their ideas and viewpoints capable of leading them to commit acts of extreme violence. Additionally, they use these same platforms to spread terror, viralizing the cruel punishments inflicted on those who oppose their beliefs. Beyond their talent for global communication, ISIS has also shown proficiency in managing its resources. It funded itself through the sale of oil and gas obtained from occupied territories. In fact, in 2014, it seized the largest oil field in Syria. The money allowed them to acquire a powerful arsenal, including heavy artillery such as M16 and AK-47 rifles, PK machine guns, anti-tank missiles, armored vehicles, and even ballistic missiles. They truly have nothing to envy from any military force, which is why the United States has led military operations to try to counter them.
The years-long battle to defeat ISIS in Syria has entered its final days. Backed by US-led coalition air support, the Syrian Democratic Forces, a coalition of Kurdish and Arab militias, has pushed the Islamic State into a tiny sliver of territory between the Euphrates River and the Iraqi border.
The resistance that these countries mounted against the advance of ISIS was effective. The terrorist organization has suffered significant defeats and lost much of its territory in Syria and Iraq. Nevertheless, it continues to be a constant threat, capable of carrying out attacks that create instability in any region of the world. And speaking of different corners of the world, it's time for a tumultuous journey to explore other realities. This time, our destination is Latin America, thousands of kilometers away from the hot zones of jihadist groups, but with a long tradition of guerrillas that rivals it. Among them, none has as much history as the FARC. Their full name is Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and they have impacted entire generations in a long-running conflict. They were founded in 1964, emerging as a response to the deep social and economic inequalities that plagued the country at that time. Inspired by communist ideals, their founders sought a radical transformation of society. In their early years, they advocated for land reform for peasants, wealth redistribution, and social justice. However, what began as a resistance movement soon turned into a large-scale armed insurgency. Over the decades, the FARC employed guerrilla tactics, attacks on state infrastructure, and kidnappings as tools to press their demands and finance their struggle. These prolonged practices caused significant suffering to Colombian communities, resulting in thousands of fatalities. Its violence led to the organization being included on the list of terrorist groups compiled by the United States, and for over half a century, it remained in that dreaded category. Only in 2016, after years of negotiations, did these revolutionary forces and the Colombian government manage to engage in the necessary dialogue to reach a historic peace agreement. This agreement was signed in Havana, Cuba, and aimed to end the armed conflict, address the underlying causes of the dispute, and pave the way for reconciliation. As part of the initiative, the FARC committed to disbanding as a group and handing over their weapons to the United Nations. Meanwhile, thousands of combatants laid down their firearms, which had claimed so many lives, and embarked on a process of reintegration into civilian life, with time allocated for making amends.
Pues en el desarrollo de nuestro accionar hemos atentado de manera colateral, no premeditada, se ha afectado a civiles. Pues les diría, como un compatriota más, que los guerrilleros y las guerrillas de la FARC tenemos nuestro corazón, nuestro espíritu y nuestra razón abierta a la reconciliación.
The fierce history of this guerrilla group still represents an open wound for Colombia, but unlike other cases, at least an end has been put to the organization that once terrorized the community. In 2021, in a historic decision, Colombia's Special Jurisdiction for Peace charged 8 former leaders of the former armed forces with kidnapping and war crimes during the armed conflict, asserting that there was command responsibility and that they must answer for the crimes against humanity committed. As we approach the end, it's time to meet the last but no less fearsome group in our review. We are talking about the Taliban regime, a movement that, like the FARC, is deeply rooted in its country of origin. This means that, unlike Al-Qaeda and ISIS, their mission has been focused on what they recognize as their place in the world: Afghanistan. The Taliban are, literally, religious students according to the translation of their name. They emerged in the 1990s amid the chaos and desperation that followed the withdrawal of Soviet forces from the country. These Muslim fundamentalists came together with the goal of imposing their strict vision of Islam in Afghanistan. Under the leadership of Mohammed Omar, they quickly gained ground and, in 1996, took control of Kabul, the Afghan capital. During their rule, the Taliban and their allies committed massacres against civilians, denied UN food supplies to 160,000 starving citizens, and carried out a policy of destroying lands by burning vast fertile areas and destroying tens of thousands of homes. Their regime also imposed public punishments, especially against women. These ranged from floggings for not adhering to dress codes to executions in public squares for those accused of adultery. The war on terror launched by the United States against Al-Qaeda in 2001 was the downfall for the Taliban. The Americans landed in Afghanistan and overthrew the regime within months, first with fierce bombings and later with the intervention of special forces like the Green Berets, which resulted in a high number of casualties. However, despite their fall, the Taliban did not disappear completely. They regrouped in rural and border areas, launching a prolonged insurgency against international forces and the Afghan government, which they managed to sustain for 2 decades with the most violent attacks until an unexpected turn of events in 2021. The Taliban regained control of Kabul, marking a turning point in recent Afghan history. Their lightning advance surprised the world and filled it with uncertainty about the country's future, which remains under their power. Now, after thoroughly learning about the 4 most bloodthirsty organizations in history, it's time to say goodbye. But before we go, we dare to offer this humble advice. No matter where you are in the world, you should watch your back, because the violence and brutality of these groups could be around the corner. Thank you very much for staying until the end. We look forward to you joining us in the next video.